When the University of Pennsylvania shunned and punished distinguished law professor Amy Wax, who is here with us today, there was only one institutional voice that spoke in her defense, and it was Paul Levy. It was an eloquent voice. He published a letter of resignation from the alma mater that he loved and had generously supported, and sent out a message that reverberated through the pages of the Wall Street Journal and will continue to reverberate. In fact, in your folders is the URL for a video interview with Paul that we intend to make viral. Paul, you left an institution that you loved, and you continue to fight to reform it. As an acknowledgement of that love and your adherence to principle, ACTA presents you with this 18th century print of Benjamin Franklin, a trustee of the university. Franklin's famous response to the question of what America's government would be was, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Paul Levy forces higher education to confront the question, a true place of learning, can we keep it? To introduce Paul Levy properly, we have with us longtime ACTA friend Philip Hamburger, Maurice and Hilda Friedman Professor of Law at Columbia University. Last year at ATHENA, Professor Hamburger articulated an agenda for addressing higher education's assault on civil liberties. Winner of the 2017 Bradley Award, Professor Hamburger has articulately defended freedom of speech and religious liberty, and is a leading voice against the encroachments of the administrative state. And he was the very first person to contact me when he read of Paul Levy to say that ACTA needs to support this person. Professor Hamburger.
Thank you. Well, it's a great honor to be back here. Last year on this stage, I noted that there needed to be a balance of fear, that universities needed to fear not merely the federal government or their faculty in their more politically correct moments, but also their faculty and students who wanted freedom of speech. And I'm glad to say that now I'm no longer apt to complain about such things. I'm now litigating them. The New Civil Liberties Alliance, which has been founded in the meantime, and of which I'm the president, is now proceeding against all sorts of threats to our freedom, including those from universities that cooperate with the federal government to suppress speech. And indeed, just last week, we filed a suit against Cornell. Those of you who are institutions that want to cooperate with the federal government in suppressing speech, maybe one day you'll meet our lawyers. Now, to get to the matter at hand. Ordinarily, when I congratulate someone, it is because he has taken a job, not because he quit. But that's exactly why we're here today, to congratulate Paul Levy for walking away. Last spring, Paul Levy took a principled and courageous stand in defense of academic freedom. He resigned from his position as trustee at the University of Pennsylvania Law School after the dean of the school sanctioned a faculty member for her public opinions. And I'm glad, Amy, you're here. Paul Levy's point, of course, was not to defend her opinions. Academic freedom is all about disputing opinions, but rather to defend her freedom to express them without pressure from the school. At stake is the freedom to express dissenting views, no matter how painful or distressing they may be to some. Disagreement is at the heart of academic inquiry and teaching, and whether a school agrees or disagrees with a dissenting view, it has no business limiting expression or penalizing its proponents. This sort of suppression of dissent is becoming commonplace in academia. Every day we read about another student or another teacher who faces difficulties on account of their speech. And because this problem has become mundane, it has become all the more common for trustees to acquiesce. Paul Levy's stance is noteworthy, precisely because it has been unusual. Most trustees can cling to their university affiliations. Rather than resign in defense of academic freedom, they prefer to shut their eyes or to have quiet conversations within the institution, which they wishfully think will actually solve the problem. In contrast, Paul Levy recognized that sometimes one must take a stand, even if it means stepping down. Now, there are many themes I could pursue today. I could regale you with yet more stories about academic intolerance. I could tell you about the value of free speech, but of course, that's why we're here. I don't need to tell you about such things. So instead, what I want to talk about is the importance of speaking out in defense of freedom. A key text on this subject is Alexander Solzhenitsyn's work, Live Not by Lies. I recommend it to you. It's very, very short and very inspiring. In this 1974 Zamzadat essay, Solzhenitsyn observed that change would never happen while people failed to sever themselves from lies. Now, of course, his society was very different from ours. We are free. The Soviets were not. Their prevailing ideology was murderous. Ours, thus far, is merely dismal. Nonetheless, his essay remains relevant to our condition. It is a powerful reminder of what he called the dead bones and scales of ideology, and of how stultifying ideals persist only when they go unchallenged. In such circumstances, it's profoundly important to repudiate falsehoods. And where such dissent is punishable, those who speak out against lies are engaged in what Solzhenitsyn called acts of civil courage. Although our society largely enjoys freedom of speech, our academic institutions, obviously, are heading in another direction. They claim to promote inquiry, but they impose restraints on speech. They claim to be unprejudiced, but their speech restrictions have an obvious slant. And it's therefore valuable to remember Solzhenitsyn's vision of civil courage. This, by the way, is one of the reasons I value ACTA. ACTA is devoted to moderate, thoughtful, well-informed truth-telling about academia, not least about academic suppression of speech. Now, of course, it doesn't take Solzhenitsyn-style courage to tell the truth about academic censorship. There's no risk of being hauled away by the secret police, of being taken to a camp in Siberia, of being tortured, of being erased from history. Nonetheless, many trustees, too many, are reluctant to stand up for freedom of speech. They're too comfortable in their academic affiliations and with the politics of academic censorship. They are, in short, too timid. Speaking to such persons, Solzhenitsyn said, "In our timidity, let each of us make a choice, whether consciously to remain a servant of falsehood or to shrug off the lies and become an honest man worthy of respect." And he added, "He who is not sufficiently courageous, don't let him be proud of his progressive views. Don't let him boast that he's an academician or a people's artist or a merited figure. Let him say to himself, I am in the herd, I am a coward." Solzhenitsyn closed by observing, if we are too frightened, then we should stop complaining that somebody is suffocating us. Why should cattle have the gift of freedom? So in this spirit, we all need to stand up against academic burdens and dissenting views. Trustees have a responsibility to secure freedom within their institutions, and thus far, too few trustees have done this. And this is why Paul Levy's actions deserve our applause. He understood that he had to defend freedom of speech, and that he could best serve his institution by walking away. So thank you.
I hope I can live up to that. I would like to start by something I haven't written down yet, but just thanking everybody and congratulating everybody here, because I think the level and quality of this discussion is very elevated, very focused, and very valuable. I must say, I feel like my computer was hacked and a bunch of my good lines were already in the discussion here, including my allusion to Yeats. I couldn't believe that one. But here we are, and I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Michael, for all of your kind words and encouragement. And Philip, still here? I don't see you. For your really, really terrific introduction. I appreciate it very much. I will read that book, particularly because, as I like to keep saying, it's not too long. It's a pleasure to be here. Michael and I have engaged in a friendly fencing match for the past few months. He continues to say that I am courageous in defending Amy Wax, and I have continued to demur. It reminds me of the interchange that is supposed to have occurred between God and Moses. Moses got to the pearly gates. God asked him who was the wisest person of his generation, and he said that he was. And God responded, "But Moses, you're supposed to be humble, aren't you?" He says, "Yes, God, but I'm also supposed to be truthful." And which unfortunately is where I'm coming around, because I didn't feel like I was so far out on the limb in resigning from the boards at Penn, because it was simply something that I felt I had to do. There was no question about whether I should or shouldn't. It was simply a situation that was unacceptable. Too many people today are genuflecting before the thought police, whose power grows daily. We're living in a world in which the few values people do hold dear are not held onto tightly enough, whether because of ambition, fear, or something else. They jettison their own dignity when ignorant crowds threaten. Only the other day, the press reported that a fellow named Joel Kaplan, a senior executive at Facebook and an old friend of Justice Kavanaugh, sat in on the Judiciary Committee hearings. He was there on his own time, on his own nickel, and just sat and listened. His presence was noted on TV by someone from Facebook who reported back to the corporate thought police. They now exist on corporate campuses, as you've heard, just as they do on college campuses. You can predict the rest. A town hall meeting was called at Facebook. Snowflakes shuddered at Mr. Kaplan's friendship with the judge. His attendance at the hearings in far-off D.C. actually made people comfortable at Facebook way back in California. Sadly, it ended with his apologizing for the discomfort his attendance caused them. Sheryl Sandberg said he made a mistake in attending the hearings. She supported these truly lost and pathetic employees. It's hard to believe. Catherine Ann Porter wrote Ship of Fools in 1962, a parable of the world blithely sailing towards calamity before World War II. We're doing that now, hopefully not towards war. I think we've lost our way. I think we're rudderless. In 1919, Eugene, William Butler Yeats wrote, and I had written this before, The Second Coming, reflecting upon the horrors of World War I, fearing the coming war for Irish independence, and whatever else he anticipated out of Germany after the crushing terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The first stanza, which isn't too long, of the poem, is worth reporting. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. Here's the best part. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Sound familiar? This is going on today on our university campuses, and also in government and at corporations. How have we come to this? You might be interested to know that the last couplet of the poem, quote, "And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born." That couplet was paraphrased by none other than Robert Bork. Talk about current events. In his book, Slouching Towards Gomorrah, he turned Bethlehem to Gomorrah, Gomorrah being what we know it to be, in his account of the decline of Western culture. So the poem is particularly relevant, I think, for a host of reasons. We have arrived. This is where we are today. And I will try to put forth a few comments on how we got here. I do not have an exhaustive list. And perhaps some of them will be helpful, although I must say I'd like to be more optimistic than I am, but I am where I am. I'd also like first to acknowledge the presence of Amy Wax, without whom of course, I wouldn't be here. But I wish I weren't, because you would be in better shape at Penn. Amy is a long-tenured professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania. She writes with stunning precision. She is clear-thinking. Today, some people call that tough or too tough, which I rather like. She is caring, and she has backbone, a part of the anatomy in horribly short supply lately. Amy wound up in the soup, so to speak, at Penn Law because she had the temerity in August of 2017 to co-publish in the Philadelphia Inquirer, a publication obviously and clearly unaffiliated with the University of Pennsylvania, her view that American life had suffered with the decline of bourgeois values and that certain Western cultures were better than others in preparing people for success in the modern world. Daniel Patrick Moynihan comes to mind as somebody who talked about this many years ago. This is an important and I think valid view, but hardly new. In fact, Amy herself in 2009 wrote a book entitled Race, Wrongs, and Remedies, Social Justice in the 21st Century, which addresses these issues and more with not a word of public criticism from her colleagues at Penn Law. Now, though, the thought police are out and empowered. 33 of her colleagues, I like to call them the Gang of 33, issued a thoughtless blanket letter of condemnation of her and her views. The dean chimed in too, agreeing with her erstwhile colleagues. How about a robust discussion among talented colleagues about these important issues? Not all but one of them, or not only one of them, even spoke to her about this before signing the letter. It really doesn't matter what one thinks of Amy's views. The essential point is to discuss them openly and civilly. And that, of course, as Philip said, is why we're here today. There the matter sat until her problems were compounded by the discovery that in September of 2017, in a blogged conversation with Glenn Lowry, an African-American professor of economics at Brown, she stated in response to his question about the performance of her black students that they hadn't done particularly well in her recollection. Grades, as you may know, at law schools are given anonymously. With that discovery, the wheels came off the bus. Calls for her firing were rife. Black students feared interacting with her. This, by the way, is the person who in 2015 received a university-wide teaching award, which is voted on by the students, and that they feared being unfairly treated. Remember, the grades are anonymously given, okay? The dean said that Amy's comments were inaccurate. By the way, she would be delighted to be shown that they were, but he not only failed to provide proof that she was wrong, he said the data was not kept, which we know it is. So how did he know she was wrong if the data was not kept? As with Title IX claims and the charges against Judge Kavanaugh, facts and proof no longer matter in our brave new world. As a result, Amy's first-year teaching duties were suspended. That's where things stood until around 2 weeks ago when calls for her termination were renewed because she had the temerity once again to opine publicly that Dr. Ford was rather late in revealing Judge Kavanaugh's alleged transgressions 3.5 decades earlier. So whatever you think about that, you know, that is a view shared by millions of people on all sides of the aisle, and fortunately, nothing has come of it at this point. So let me offer one example of how I think we started down this path, and it relates to Title IX, about which I'm not an expert, but I've looked at it now for quite a while. Title IX was supposed to equalize expenditures of funding for men's and women's sports teams, and through creative lawyering became a wedge for equal protection arguments. To telescope the timeline on this debate, that led to the infamous Dear Colleague letter from the Obama administration, which, and remember, we just witnessed the Kavanaugh fiasco, created a modern version of 15th century star chambers. A student, usually a male, is accused of sexual transgressions and prohibited from confronting his accuser, bringing witnesses in his defense, cross-examining the accuser, or retaining a lawyer to assist him in the so-called trial. The so-called jury and so-called judges are completely unschooled in the judicial process, and who knows how prejudiced they are on a personal level. This, by the way, is not only contrary to bedrock principles of Western jurisprudence, but a form of suppression of speech. This is what is happening on our campuses today. Groupthink, suppression of speech, knee-jerk conclusions, a disdain for facts and proof, married to assumptions of guilt rather than of innocence. This mentality traveled right from the college campus directly to the public and right into the halls of Congress. The same irresponsible thinking that motivated the Dear Colleague letter was set in play when Judge Kavanaugh was accused of those transgressions. This is important because we must realize that our campuses are our cultural pace setters. People joke that what happens, somebody else said this earlier, Jonathan, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and that may be true, but what happens on our college campuses and universities affects our entire society, and we're living through it now. We are at risk. We're so much at risk, and I think ACTA has more of a vital role today than I think it ever realized it did. So what do we do about this? And I have only a few suggestions. I think the group gets it, but I'll repeat it since I wrote it. To start with, a conclusion. You know, as a trustee or an alum, don't give money to your alma mater unless and until it meets your standards for campus free speech and level-headed thinking and leadership. Make sure your school commits itself to teach its students and does not permit them to wallow in the new wave of what I like to call faux learning, faux scholarship, courses that never existed. It's unbelievable what these curriculum books look like today. It's really inconceivable that anybody could treat seriously some of these subjects, let alone devote millions of dollars of administrative and teaching expense to this. But that's where the world is. I think our heritage matters, and I think that's what our students have to be taught. Curriculum is key. Number two, if you care about your school, and if you care about our country, demand that some version of the Chicago principles be adopted. There is simply no room in American life for the suppression of thought and speech. Nothing less is acceptable. Force your school's leaders to explain why these principles, or some version thereof, have not been adopted. If you are not satisfied, close your wallet and be sure to explain why you have done so. Next point, the humanities. And by that I mean the vast range of subjects that represent the backbone of our civilization, our thinking, our values, our sensibilities. These must be reinstated to their central role in educating our youth and empowering them to be thoughtful citizens and hopefully leaders. Our rich heritage must impact who we are today, how we act, what we say, what we can expect of others, and how we conduct ourselves in public forums. Today, too many of our young are largely unhinged from the forces and the thinking that made our culture and our country the admiration of the world. These students do not know. Indeed, they disdain and reject, even without knowing, the history and richness of Western civilization. Quality schools like Reed College in Portland have terminated their Western civilization study requirements in exchange for gibberish, lousy scholarship, and lousy thinking. It's remarkable. And think about what Reed did this way. Does their decision suggest that the leadership of Reed decided, yes, the students are right. These courses don't advance the education of our students? I doubt it. That's not what happened. It simply means that Reed leadership caved in to noisy, unruly, rude, and poorly educated young people who found a platform for their personal frustrations and perhaps a way to conceal their own inadequacies. I can't address how this happened, but it starts early. Education, real education, full-bodied and well-rounded education will lead us from the abyss, but it will take time. And the lady who earlier mentioned high school, I think, is very much on the mark. It has to start really early. Next point is leadership. If you are a trustee, make sure the right people lead your institution. And what might be some of the traits of such a leader? Strong, backbone, well-articulated values that are shared by the Board of Trustees. Leaders need not be chirpy, cheery cheerleaders, like one I well know. We need people who are with core convictions and an unshakable commitment to the school's essential value and mission. It's not about football. It's not about a new building. It's not about a larger endowment. It's about educating young people to be whole people. At the board level, debate the school's mission and priorities, and be sure the leadership has bought into these. Remember, the school's president works for its board. The board has to lead, which brings me to the role of trustees, my last point, I think. This is the hard part, and it's the easy part, really. Trustees have to take stock. A trustee is a fiduciary and entrusted with the ultimate responsibility for a school's direction. Unfortunately, we all know that that's not the way it works. Trustees are appointed, not elected. There are some examples where they do, but not often. They are rewarded for service and financial support to the school. They are, in virtually all cases, alumni of the school. They want their children, their grandchildren, and their friends' children to go to the school, and they want to help them get in. They usually genuinely like their fellow trustees. They are, bottom line, lulled into passivity. They like their role, they like the prestige, and they have absolutely no incentive to rock the boat. And that's why we are where we are today. And I will say it's the way of the world. This is what happens. So a way has to be found to fight this tendency. A trustee must decide what role he or she wants to play at the school, whether one wants to have a say in the school's direction, big decisions, engage the board in leading the staff, take issues like affirmative action, diversity, campus speech. These were never discussed at Penn. There was never a forum, never an opportunity. This has to occur. This is what the university is about. I understand the social mission, some of the public universities and the obligations that they have, and I respect that. But I think on the larger societal level, aside from helping bring people up, and I think Mark made a terrific point on that, I think our universities have been and are not now, and hopefully will regain their place of this important sort of leadership in our society. Unless a critical mass of trustees at a given institution takes a leadership role, things will continue as they are. Students will lead, and administrators will follow. I realize how easy it is for me to shoot off this list, but change has to start somewhere, and I think it will have to come a step at a time and take time. But I view these as the most pressing problems. I wound up in the situation I was in, I would say inadvertently by accident, and I knew what I had to do. So I did it, and I thank you for the kind words, and let's hope we can make things better in the years ahead.